Wouldn't it be great if you were able to have a better understanding of your data storage performance and be able to adjust loads accordingly? Kaminario customers are taking advantage of this capability with Kaminario Clarity. Clarity is a SaaS-based predictive analytics platform that delivers intelligence, automation, and analytics to customers' cloud-scale infrastructure. In this video, we'll demonstrate how Clarity helps customers analyze performance loads and plan how to reallocate resources based on latency and bandwidth needs. So in this session, we're going to take a look at the Performance tab. Here we've got 6959 selected out of our two arrays. We can only look at one array at a time and from the Performance. And from this Performance tab, you're going to notice that the volume groups are listed here. So selected for this 90 days, we show latency, IOPS, and bandwidth. And across this chart, you can move across just very slowly or quickly just to get a view. On May the 19th, we had a burst of 4.3 gigs, but on average 2.6 gigs of throughput, 40,000 IOPS, running 0.7 milliseconds of latency. The dark blue is representative of the write I/O, the light blue the read, and then this gray line at the top is the maximum output at that point or during that period. So on June the 3rd, we see here, okay, there's a 9.7 gig burst, but that was not typical. Let's take a look at the last 7 days. Give the chart a moment. We see this is a very steady state, very small bursts, but by and large, nothing very severe. Now, on the table to the left, we see bandwidth, IOPS, latency. There's some additional data that we'll show here in just a second. We can also sort this. I'm going to start by sorting this to show which volume groups have actually had some throughput, some IOPS, and so that we're working with a smaller data set here. I am just going to select a few of these that have had a little bit of action, let's say. And so that we're not seeing everything, we're going to take this Show Selected button and turn that to just show the selections. So here we see, again, 7 days, the average bandwidth, average IOPS, average latency. Having selected these, just so we have a smaller data set, if we want to dive into this data a little further, we can expand the volume groups to the volumes. And now we'll notice that we get these maximum numbers, the maximum IOPS during this 7-day period, the maximum bandwidth all the way down. We also get this maximum latency number and whether or not this is deduped data. So this really allows to dive in. Let's look at June the 29th, and we'll just take a little snippet of time here, a little custom look. So we're going to look essentially let's look from 8 until 4. Obviously a very steady state. But we can take a look at all of our volumes and volume groups and see, okay, well, looks like these were not really doing a lot. Most of the activity came from these volumes. I/O, pretty similar, latency, IOPS, etc. So we know that one is always the same. So we'll get rid of that one, and we can see some of the other ones were data's been very sparse. Now, let's go ahead and turn this off so that we can see all of the volumes and volume groups, and we're going to select all of those. Put us back to a 7-day view. So from back at this default view, where we're seeing 7 days by volume group, what we want to do now is look at it per volume. That will really allow us to dive into some more of the advanced metrics. And let's select just a few of these. I've sorted it by bandwidth here. I'm going to see some of these that really get at least a little bit of throughput. And now we are going to turn that show selected on. And again, we can see the IOPS. I'm going to shrink this, shrink the chart down a little bit. There we can see these maximum numbers. So from the volumes, we'll be able to see the maximum across this 7-day span in terms of bandwidth, IOPS, and latency. We can also see that these are not deduped volumes, and the allocated capacity is listed there as well. So knowing that VD-read04 tends to be busier, then that would allow us to say, well, if we want to cut down some of this maximum latency here, then we could possibly move it to a different volume, split up the volume groups. If it was on dedupe and it was a lot of very large writes, we may want to move it to a non-dedupe volume group. Let's return this to our normal view. We'll go back to volume groups. So reset here back at our normal screen. Still have this moved over just a bit. What we'd like to do now is to take a look at, we're going to sort this very quickly by average bandwidth. And yeah, we know that volume group is definitely the most used one. But let's take a look at the block size and the read and write I/O. So here we can drop down and say, what are we seeing for blocks smaller than 8K? Let's look at a more standard block size. Okay, so 8s to 64s, the vast majority of our I/O falls in that range. But I want to know what latency does for just reads. Okay, so we're reading, let's say it's some larger sequential reads, or even smaller. Let's say it's a 16K read sequential, getting about a millisecond of latency. Really, really good numbers. Then we can come over here, let's say larger reads. Doesn't look like we get many of those. Anything in that large to mid, really not a lot. So we see that all of our the bulk of our workload in terms of reads is this standard 8 to 64. We can also look at the writes. Let's look at that same size. We see here, wow, we're seeing 0.2, 0.3 milliseconds of latency. Obviously, not as much workload in that write because we are running looks like about an 80-20. I'm going to go ahead and reset back here our standard view. We can do this via volumes. And if we want to see in the last week what has produced the most write IOPS, we'll just do a simple sort. And we can see, okay, well, it is these VD reads, this VMDS1. After that, gets pretty shallow, right? So this allows us to cut through and look at data in different ways. We can look at the reads, the writes, both of them through volumes and volume groups. So from this standard view, again, here we can see the reads, block sizes all. The benefit to Clarity is it really allows a great filtering of the data, both at the volume and volume group level, to trace down and possible performance issues, to rebalance based on bandwidth constraints. You can pull reports for days, weeks, months, custom time periods, check latency across all of these, see our max outputs at a very quick glance, and then dive in as we need to find issues or reallocate resources. One thing to note, we can export the table and the chart data into Excel so that it can be used for presentations, pie charts. If you prefer to cut it in Excel, to cut that data, to look at it at a granular state and something other than the GUI, that's always available as well. Ready to simplify data management of your storage infrastructure? Visit www.kaminario.com and discover how you can get more clarity with Kaminario Clarity.